Welcome to the Schmooze, Calgary's weekly community podcast where we bring together the voices, events, and stories shaping Jewish life in our city. I'm Don Shapiro with Jared Shore. Pull up a chair, let's schmooze. So, Jared, we just spent about an hour chatting with Emile Scheffel from CJPAC, and wow, what a guy, right?
I love Emile.
Yeah.
This guy has been a huge gift to our community. Huge. And a heck of a nice guy.
I met Emile by happenstance, and it was just after October 7th. It was a few months after, and uh, at that point, I felt like I needed to do more, or I need to be involved more. I just that had that sort of fighting spirit. I'm here in Calgary, and there's nothing I can do, and he gave me a path to be able to contribute. And man, I really feel that I have because of that, and I continue to do so. So, and it was just over a cup of coffee with he was having a cup of coffee with my brother, and I just happened to walk by, and I was like, "Hey guys," and I sat
And
down
you
and
learned
joined
all
them.
about him. Yeah.
And and then following that, Kayla joined the fellowship program that they have, which we talk about, and CJPAC. When you talk about an organization that can make a difference in policy on a federal, provincial, or municipal level, this is the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt so empowered by CJPAC in the
Right.
last couple elections. They were great to connect with, and I feel such a good outlet for folks in our community. If you want to get involved, this is a way to get very tangibly involved. So, absolutely, give this a listen. You guys are going to really enjoy the conversation with Emile.
Yeah, I like last election, last provincial election in my riding. I had a certain amount of apathy. This was well before the October 7th, and I was confident that the person that I liked was going to win again, and so I didn't really contribute my time or dollars or anything. And then she lost, and she lost to somebody that has is very questionable in her advocacy against Israel and the Jewish community, and I felt, oh my God, and it was a very close race. I felt, oh my God, I could have made a difference, and so I promised myself that next time I will make a difference, and getting in touch with Emile is the way to do that.
Yeah, yeah. I think we cannot afford to be apathetic about elections in Canada right now. No way.
And when we start talking about allies, we need more allies, that aren't Jewish. Emile's not Jewish, and he's out there fighting for and with the Jewish community because of his experiences and learning about his background and what drove him to be part and lead CJPAC. Wow, is that ever inspiring? It's hopeful.
Yeah,
It does leave
yeah.
me with hope.
He is an inspiring guy. I've sat on panels with him before, and he is as good a spokesperson and for the Jewish community, and more knowledgeable about Jewish issues and Israel and the Middle East, probably more knowledgeable than 99% of our community. So he is an inspiring guy.
Yeah, we are going to add his contact information into the notes of this podcast. And I would recommend if you do want to get involved, if you do want more information, just get in touch with Emile. He'll take you out for coffee, and he's wonderful, and his organization, I really believe, is really making a difference.
Absolutely.
Um, but all that being said, we each have a book review or a book recommendation for today. So, Jared, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, well, so I've mentioned before, big fan of Dan Senor's podcast, Call Me Back. And one of his frequent guests is Amit Segal, who's a longtime journalist in Israel. And Call It 4 a.m. is a fantastic read. I'm partway through it, but about some of the big decisions that Israel's prime ministers have made, some of the big game changers, and delving into them. A really great read for those of you who are interested in Israeli politics. Call It 4 a.m. Amit Segal. What have you got for us?
So, my book, and I'm actually totally going to pick that up because it sounds absolutely amazing. Mine's a little bit more mainstream, and I had this book given to me as a gift because I don't know, as much as I want to support it, if I would have had the courage to read it or buy it on my own because of my fear of its content. And
Hmm.
it's Hostage by Elie Sharabi. Um, it is the take of Ellie's experience as a hostage in Gaza. He was released in prior to the latest release, and he wrote a book about his experience, not only for himself but for some of the other hostages that he was with, in his personal story, and uh, it's uh, words have power, and this book has an enormous amount of power. And I think that it's important for us to really know these stories and understand these stories on a fundamental level to remind us all what we're fighting for.
Yeah. And Don, one quick note on that book. It's a quick read. It's a compelling read.
Yeah.
And Ellie is he's a tremendous individual, and what he went through and the way he's able to articulate it is fantastic in this book. And actually, he left me with a couple quotes that I used in my speech to my son at his bar mitzvah. They were that inspiring. It is a fabulous book that was written under and about the most unimaginable experiences. But don't let that stop you. This is a great book.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's a book about courage and heroism.
Yeah, it is.
And it's so as difficult as it is, it's a high recommend. Folks, all that being said, the conversation that we're about to, or I guess not the conversation, the schmooze that we're about to play with Emile, does set the stage. One of the things that we talked about after we shut the recording off is that Emile will also keep his finger on the pulse of politicians that you, the listener, will want us to talk to and ask questions of and hold people to account, of which we will do. So without further ado, it's the schmooze with Emile Scheffel from CJPAC.
In times of uncertainty, one thing has always protected the Jewish community: engagement. CJPAC, the Canadian Jewish Political Affairs Committee, empowers Jewish Canadians and allies to participate in democracy, build relationships with decision makers, and stand up against antisemitism. Not with slogans, not with fear, but with training, civic leadership, and people who show up. Do you believe a stronger Jewish future in Canada is built through participation? Now is the time to act. Support CJPAC. Make a difference. Donate today at cjpac.ca.
And welcome back to the schmooze. We have with us today Emile Scheffel. Hey, Emile, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Don. Hey, Jared. Great to see you guys.
Nice to have you here.
It is a real honor having you here, not only for the work that you do, but to be able to book at least an hour or 90 minutes of your time, considering you have a newborn, is quite an accomplishment. It's quite a coup for us.
Listen, it's an honor to spend time with you guys, and Mazel Tov on the launch of the Schmooze. I think this is such an important source of information and perspective for the Calgary Jewish community and beyond. So good on you guys for getting this going.
Oh, thank you.
Emile, you know, I think that we're honored to have you. Um, while CJPAC has been around for a while, uh, I think you're relatively new to the organization in your capacity, and the fact that you're based here in Calgary has given CJPAC, I think, a new place on the Calgary Jewish community map. So lots to discuss today, and our community is going to want to know lots about CJPAC. But first, tell us a little bit about you. How did you end up working for this organization?
Yeah, I'll try to give you the medium length version because there's a multi-hour version and a very short version. So I'll try to land somewhere in the middle. So I was born and raised in Kamloops, and so interior BC, relatively small city, no sort of organized, visible Jewish community. I'm not Jewish, so I grew up without a lot of contact, hardly any, with members of the Jewish community or Jewish culture or tradition or the Jewish faith. So I was not looking back to when I was 16 or 17. It was not predictable. It was not inevitable that I would end up years later working professionally in the Jewish community. I did have some family connection to the story of the Jewish people, and specifically, sadly, to the Holocaust. My family on my father's side is Czech. And my grandparents on that side came of age in Prague during the Nazi occupation. And my grandmother, in particular, had a number of very close Jewish friends, including her boyfriend, at the time. And I think a lot of my perspective on history, and especially modern history, was shaped by the time I got to spend with my grandparents and hearing how their Jewish friends, my grandmother's Jewish boyfriend, went from over the course of really a handful of years, went from being fully accepted, integrated, contributing, appreciated, respected members of Czech society, to the Nazi invasion and systematic creeping and then dramatic marginalization and persecution, and ultimately extermination. And I think as a child, when you hear that, you can't help but have some of your perspective and your worldview shaped by such a dramatic series of events that's sort of 1 degree separated from your own experience. And so I sort of carried that with me, and that was, I think, sort of in the back of my mind, or almost in my genetic code, when I got to Carleton in Ottawa to do my undergrad in political science. I kind of got bitten pretty early on by the political bug, as some of us can share that experience. And so I immediately got involved in politics on campus and getting involved in student union elections and campus politics. And over the course of that experience, I made, just kind of by accident, by good luck, a few really close Jewish friends who were lived with me in residence and were also involved in campus politics. And that was a time at Carleton where as a lot of your listeners probably know, and as you guys know, on each of the campuses across Canada over the past couple of decades, anti-Israel activism, anti-Semitism kind of has peaks and valleys. It ebbs and flows depending what's happening in the Middle East, depending who's on each campus at any given time. And when I got to Carleton, it just happened that anti-Israel activism and anti-Semitism was on a real upswing. And so I found myself on the same side of campus politics as my new Jewish friends, and got to experience through their eyes the anti-Semitism, the marginalization, the slander that they had to put up with simply for being Jewish, and that some of my other friends who were also allies had to put up with for being associated with the Jewish community. One quick example. A good friend of mine named Nick was running for one of the student union executive positions, and earlier in the year he had gone to the Hillel campus welcome back barbecue, and at the barbecue he just kind of in a lighthearted moment he put an Israeli flag over his back like a cape and tied it around his neck and posed for a photo. And a few months later, as he's running in the student union elections, these sort of crude black and white printed out posters go up all around campus with that picture and the caption, "Nick is a Zionist, don't believe his lies." And that was kind of an eye-opening moment for me, that being viewed as a Zionist, being viewed as a friend of the Jewish community, could put you on the wrong end of the political equation and be used against you. And yeah, Don, I see you have a clarifying question.
Yeah, because that experience, I think that's what always intrigues me, because it just do you feel that it just happened? Your allyship at that point just happened to be because of the group that you're in. Could you have seen a scenario where your passion, had you gone down a different rabbit hole with a different friend group, would have gone down a different way? Or do you feel that sort of family traditional background, the story of your grandmother, was always going to lead you in this path? Because I'm always curious of when I look at these students on campus today, they seem like, fairly good kids, some of them,
Yeah.
right? Like they come from maybe good homes. Maybe what do you think is the allure that they're facing, that they could look at this and just be so short-sighted and hateful and just accept that, these definitions? Is it because there's just no education? And I mean, if you ask me, I'm against genocide. I don't like apartheid. I don't like ethnic cleansing. I'll raise my hand to that. And because there's no deeper associations, just that's it. Is it that simple?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's hard to say with certainty. Had destiny played out differently, and had I made a different group of friends, would I have gone down a different path? I do think you mentioned Don, knowing history, or being familiar with history, and I think that being a bit of a history nerd, but also having that family connection that I mentioned to the tragedy of the Holocaust, and kind of the foundation of the modern state of Israel that was built from that baseline. I think I was inoculated against the propaganda from the other side, if I can call it that.
Fair enough.
I like to believe that I was protected, I was shielded by that knowledge and that experience, by that DNA, even from getting pulled to the other side of the argument. Um, Having said that, I think you put your finger on something, Don, that's really important, which is this idea of who's on the right side of history, right? I felt very strongly from day one that being on the side of the Jewish people against persecution and marginalization means de facto you're on the right side of history. I can absolutely understand, to your point, why some students, many students, who see Israel and the United States and sort of the Western world, as the oppressor, and the Palestinian people and others, as the oppressed. In that framework, who doesn't want to be on the side of the oppressed against the oppressor, right? Who doesn't want to be David against Goliath? And I also, I'm very conscious when I talk about campus, when I talk to students around campus now. Social media barely existed when I was on campus. I don't want to age myself too precisely, but like Facebook was the big cutting edge thing, and that was where our political debates played out. I think it was pre-Twitter, it was pre-Instagram, it was certainly way pre-TikTok, which I'm very grateful for. I was on campus at a time where you could still have fact-based conversations in a way that I think is much more difficult now, to the detriment of students on campus, but also all of society. I think I'm just grateful I went to school when I did, and
Right.
hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I
I'm
totally.
I'm grateful that I went to high school before there were, cameras and video cameras in every
Yeah,
pocket.
I bet you are. I bet you are.
I went to high school
I-
in Central Alberta, guys. I'm very grateful. There was no.
I believe it.
So, Emile, you came out of university galvanized, and then what? What
Yeah.
brought you to CJPAC?
Yeah, so it was actually still in university, and one piece I sort of skipped over is that as I was working in campus politics with my new Jewish friends, I also I went to my first Shabbat dinner at the Chabad House in Ottawa, and to be honest, it was kind of the lure of free alcohol that was the hook to start going to Chabad on a Friday night, but. With Rabbi Boyarsky, who's still the rabbi at that Chabad house, what feels like generations later, doesn't seem to have aged at all from the photos that I see. But I made more Jewish friends and got to experience Jewish culture and Torah portions and just all the richness of Jewish culture and tradition and faith. So that sort of rounded out my knowledge and my appreciation of the Jewish community in Canada. And so towards the end of my undergrad, I got recruited into a CJPAC program called the Fellowship, that I know Dawn's daughter has been a part of, and Jared, hopefully both of your sons will get the opportunity to be a part of. And the CJPAC Fellowship, we talk about it in more detail if you guys want to, but really what it did for me at that stage of my life was it took me from a young person with a hunger to make the world a better place, to shape the world for the better, and somebody who had a ton of passion for politics and for social change and all those good things, it helped me supplement that passion with skills and knowledge and relationships that allowed me to make an impact in the political arena throughout my career. So I was fortunate to do the fellowship in my fourth year. The year after, when I was in law school, I was able to be a senior fellow and do the fellowship a second time. And that really was the foundation of the skills that I then took into my career in politics. So I worked in politics on and off, sort of directly and indirectly, for a little bit over a decade, primarily in BC. I went back and lived in Victoria and then in Vancouver. And over that period of time, I stayed involved in CJPAC, mostly as a volunteer, but also as a speaker at CJPAC gatherings and fundraisers, because I was one of those fellowship program alumni that did what CJPAC wanted me to do, went and worked in politics and put my skills to work, working in government, in political parties, on campaigns at election time. And so I stayed pretty in touch with CJPAC, and then skip ahead to the aftermath of October 7th. I was working outside of politics in a corporate job for a great company and really enjoying what I was doing. But that in that post October 7th aftermath, I just felt so compelled to be doing more, and more than frankly I had time for, with a demanding full-time job outside of politics, to stand up against anti-Semitism and to push back on the sort of toxic forces that I saw gathering strength in here in Canada, as well as around the world. And at that point, one of the people who helped build CJPAC, Rachel Chertkoff, had moved on to a new role, and so the opportunity opened up to come on board. I was asked if I would take on the job in Toronto. I said I would love to do the job, but I'm not moving to Toronto. I was just sort of starting to put down roots in Calgary with my now fiance Molly. And so the time to move wasn't right for me, but they were kind enough to let me stay in Calgary, which, as you kind of alluded to, Jared, has been just an amazing opportunity to be able to get to know the Calgary Jewish community, including great leaders and friends like yourselves, and help the community here maximize its political impact. So how's that for the medium length version of how it all
amazing
unfolded?
And what an amazing commercial for the fellowship program. I mean,
Right.
you did exactly what CJPAC set out to do.
Yeah,
Amazing. Yeah.
and I can speak to its efficacy because I know, like you said, Kayla did take part of the in the fellowship, and prior to that, her connection to politics was, I'll say, much less than it is now, considering that she's works for a government relations firm. So
I love it.
it does leave an impact. But before we get into the fellowship and CJPAC's mission and everything, what does CJPAC stand for? What is the what is the acronym? What is its overall goal? And then let's start taking a look at some of the programs and move on from there. But what is CJPAC?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's our number one most frequently asked question is what the heck does it stand for? So it's the Canadian Jewish Political Affairs Committee. And really, CJPAC was founded about 20 years ago on the premise that the Jewish community in Canada will never be numerically significant as voters alone. There were then and there are now about 10 federal ridings out of now 343, where Jewish Canadians make up 10% or more of the population. And so that means that in the vast majority of this country, the vast majority of ridings, cities, communities, especially outside of the major cities, there are a lot of politicians, a lot of elected officials who don't have a statistically significant number of Jewish constituents. Therefore, we can't really expect them to know very much about anti-Semitism, very much about the Canada-Israel relationship. We can't expect them to have the Jewish community's needs and concerns, or the Jewish community's contributions to Canada, which of course are incredible and disproportionate to the community's size, both historically and today. We can't just count on politicians and decision makers organically being aware of the Jewish community. And so CJPAC was kind of built on the idea that Jewish Canadians and allies of the Jewish community have to be at the table wherever decisions are made that affect the future of the Jewish community in Canada. So certainly elected in parliament, in legislatures, at city councils and school boards, but also working as the political staff that operate behind the scenes to support politicians, as the campaign managers and the volunteers and the fundraisers and the volunteer coordinators that make the difference in whether a given politician gets elected or reelected or goes down to defeat. It really is about maximizing the political impact of Jewish Canadians and people who share the values of Jewish Canadians. And we sort of do that in three basic ways. The first is training. So essentially training Jewish Canadians and allies of the Jewish community to participate in the political arena. What does that mean? Helping to win elections or winning elections themselves at all levels of government right across the country. But we don't want to train people just for the sake of training them. So once somebody is trained, we want to help them have an impact at election time by helping them support a candidate who shares their values and needs their help. So if you are somebody that supports the Conservatives, if you're somebody that supports the Liberals, if you're somebody that supports the NDP, we're never going to tell you who you should vote for or who you should volunteer for. But we will say, based on what you've told us about your values and where you live, here are a couple of candidates you might consider spending some time helping out. And that's really how we sort of maximize the impact of the Jewish community and individual Jewish community members in the electoral process. And then the third piece is relationships. We really believe that the Jewish community's strongest defense against anti-Semitism, the Jewish community's strongest asset in advancing its goals and its priorities and advocating for our shared values is direct relationships with decision makers, especially elected officials. So both of you know, because you've done this in partnership with CJPAC, as simple as hosting a politician who doesn't have a large number of Jewish constituents for a Shabbat dinner in your home, or inviting them over for your Seder, and just getting to know them on a personal level, because all the research, all the data that I've seen suggests the most powerful inoculation against anti-Semitism is knowing Jewish people. The more Jewish people you know, the less likely you are to fall prey to becoming someone who hates Jews. And so that relationship building piece is the other sort of pillar of what we do, and happy to dig into more detail on any of those pieces, depending where you guys want to take the conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
So one of the things we committed to, that Don and I committed to, was helping the community understand the alphabet soup. And you've done a great job explaining CJPAC. In a snapshot, describe, because I think this is a question that you get frequently, what's the difference between CJPAC and CJA, which is the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs? And then, one name that people hear a lot, I mean, obviously they're not in Canada, but is AIPAC. And so how are you different? Are you the Canadian version of AIPAC? And how do you differ from CJA?
Yeah, awesome questions, and I better hit this one out of the park because I answer this question probably more than any other. So let me start by saying one thing that CJA and CJPAC are not is competitors. We're very, very close partners and friends. I'm a huge fan of CJA. Back when I was advocating for Israel and for Jewish students on campus, it was the team at CJA that I would turn to when I needed communications advice or support. They're an incredible organization run by incredible people that I'm really privileged to work with as really close partners. What CJA does, as you know, Jared having been on the national board for a number of years, doing great work there, is CJA is the official advocacy agent, the voice of Jewish federations across Canada. Why is that important? As you know, it's because when politicians are looking to understand, quote unquote, the Jewish community's perspective, of course, the Jewish community is incredibly diverse. As we all know, there's a rich tradition of debate and disagreement in the Jewish community on any given issue. But when it comes to the vast majority of Jewish Canadians being represented on the issues that matter, on government policy making, on the laws that are debated and passed, you need to have that one official voice. And so federations across Canada fund CJA to be their advocate and their voice. So when just to make it very real, when there is a need to change the law through Parliament, or there is a government policy decision that needs to be made, whether it's on foreign affairs or on healthcare or on the rules around kosher animal slaughter, that whole range of issues that affects the Jewish community. CJA goes in and through, lobbying sometimes is a dirty word. I don't see it that way at all, because I think it's a really important part of the democratic process. But whether you call it lobbying or government relations, CJA is responsible for making sure politicians at every level and their staff and the bureaucracy understand the Jewish community's needs and concerns and priorities. But CJA also plays a really important role in participating in the public debate on issues that affect all Canadians. So whether that is advocating for a strong relationship between Canada and Israel, or making sure that more Canadians are aware of the dangerous extremism and terrorist and foreign interference influences that impact the Jewish community, but also affect the interests of all Canadians and the country as a whole. CJA is a really important voice on those issues in the public square. What we do at CJPAC, by contrast, is a bit lower profile. We don't send out action alerts that ask people to sign petitions or email their member of parliament. It really is that training, election mobilization, and relationship sort of triangle that we focus on. We like to say that when we're doing our jobs well, it makes CJA's job easier, because when CJA goes to whichever member of parliament or provincial legislator or city councillor with an ask, or to make them aware of an issue that affects the Jewish community, that conversation is going to go better. That door is going to be more open if that politician has been exposed in a positive way to the Jewish community through the work that we do at CJPAC. Good segue maybe into the other part of your question, which is how CJPAC compares to APAC, and definitely a question that we get a lot, and rightly so. The biggest difference, so I guess first thing is APAC in the US, I think it's fair to say, does a combination of what CJA does and what CJPAC does in Canada, in that they lobby decision makers, they try to shape public opinion on issues of concern to the Jewish and pro-Israel communities, and they also mobilize in elections to try and get some candidates elected and get other candidates defeated. I think the biggest difference that really that underlines the distinction between Canada and the U.S. is U.S. politics. Money plays a much larger role, and very, very large amounts of money get thrown around in U.S. politics. And so one of the things that APAC is able to do, and is famous, or depending on your perspective, infamous for doing, is raising tens and tens of millions of dollars and putting that money to work through TV advertising and other forms of campaigning, again, to get help some candidates get elected and others defeated. And APAC, it's important to say, in the US, is one of hundreds and hundreds of groups that do exactly this. Some on the pro-Israel side of the equation, many on the anti-Israel side of the equation. So it's really, I think, in the US, a matter of fighting fire with fire. APAC, I think, for reasons largely involving anti-Semitism, gets singled out and gets a bad rap relative to other organizations do the same thing. In Canada, though, money plays a much smaller role in politics, in that a given candidate for member of parliament running in a federal election is able to spend somewhere around $100,000 in their campaign, compared to the millions and millions of dollars that get spent by somebody who's running for Congress, or even the state assembly in the US. There are also very strict rules around who can raise and spend money in the political process. In Canada, only individuals can donate to candidates or parties. They can only donate relatively small amounts of money, less than $2,000 per person. And so there's just no way for an organization like CJPAC to raise and spend a significant amount of money trying to influence election outcomes. We have to do things in a much more grassroots, much more individual, I would argue much more labor-intensive way, which is training people to make an impact, helping connect them with candidates who share their values and need their help, and making sure that that they're feeling appreciated and the work they do is meaningful. So they show up not just in this election cycle, but in the election cycle after that, and hopefully, bring their kids, bring their cousins, and try to maximize the community's impact in a much more humble but equally important way.
And I really appreciate that differential. And I think that kind of leads into that next part of what we want to talk to you about. It's the one of the most infamous quotes over the last couple of years was when the former foreign minister said, when asked about her connection or her desire to vote a certain way on the Palestine-Israel issue, she said, "Well, my demographic isn't Jewish," or something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. And that's really where your work comes in. It's to really make a difference on those. So, a lot of people will look at a specific party, but you don't look at a specific party. You are in contact and very friendly with members, and I know from the fellowship that you don't just speak with the Conservative caucus. They also listen to the Liberal caucus and the NDP caucus and so forth. There are more allies out there than I think we're A, aware of, and B, the only way to really understand that is by getting involved. And I think that kind of, I'll have a follow-up. So I kind of want you to speak to that, and then I have a follow-up to that.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's a lot there. So I'll try to be concise, because this is obviously a huge issue, and just to set the frame, and I think most of your listeners know this, but sort of round numbers. I think it's fair to say 10 years ago, there was maybe 35, 36 million Canadians in this country and about 400,000 Jewish Canadians. Today, there are still about 400,000 Jewish Canadians. Some have passed away, some have been born, but it nets out to about the same number. And now there are 40 million Canadians. So the Jewish community in Canada, is, thank God, pretty stable, and maybe growing modestly, depending on how you measure it. But it is shrinking as a percentage of the Canadian population. And
Right.
so there are fewer and fewer parts of this country where politicians have to worry about, sorry to be crude, but call it the Jewish vote. There are not that many ridings where the Jewish vote, if I can call it that, is a factor in who wins and who loses, if Jewish Canadians only show up in the process as voters. And that goes back to the idea of doing more, being a volunteer, being a campaigner, being an organizer. The really interesting aspect of all of this, I think, is that the vast majority of Canadians, the issues that keep you guys and keep me up at night, whether it's things that are happening in the Middle East or anti-Semitism here in Canada, or the rise of extremism and radicalization in a bunch of different flavors, those things worry me more than just about anything else. For the vast majority of Canadians, those are not in the top 10 things that they think about, right? And so in the political arena, when it comes to getting politicians to see the perspective that we want them to see, there's this constant competition between different interest groups, and there's a temptation sometimes to make it a demographic issue, as the politician that you mentioned did, Don. But I think it's more complicated than that, because you do have, right now, to give a really concrete example, there's an individual running for the leadership of the federal NDP, who is Jewish. He comes from a long line of very well-respected, very impactful Jewish leaders, from sort of the labor Zionist movement, and there's that's a valid part of the Jewish tradition and contribution to politics in this country. That individual, who I could potentially be a Jewish leader of the NDP, sounds like great news, right? On paper, he is a hardcore anti-Zionist who, there are demographics in this country that are associated with being anti-Israel. This individual, I think, is probably more anti-Israel in his words and his deeds than just about any Canadian in the mainstream. So the dividing lines on these issues cut a bunch of different ways. But what I think is critical is this. there's often all the time there are people who say, the conservatives are the only party that stands with the Jewish community. Why don't you just support them? How can you support liberals? And important to note, CJPAC doesn't directly support any candidates. What we do is empower Jewish Canadians and allies to support the candidate that lines up best with their values and where they can make the greatest impact. And for transparency, because I just believe in being very direct. Obviously, I'm nonpartisan in the job that I do at CJPAC, but I'm a pretty long time card carrying conservative. I was on Schmooze EDA until recently, and very proudly so in my off hours. Pretty hardcore blue conservative. But I believe, I think as strongly as anybody does, that if Jewish Canadians and people who care about the Jewish community exit the Liberal Party, exit the New Democratic Party,
Right.
the void or the vacuum that they leave behind them will be filled by people who either don't care that much about the future of the Jewish community, or in some cases are actively hostile to the Jewish community and on the wrong side of the issues that we care about. So when people sort of challenge the multi-partisan aspect of our work, I understand where they're coming from, but I just challenge them to think about a scenario where there are no more Jews and no more allies of the Jewish community involved in the Liberal Party, involved in the NDP. Right now, and the NDP gets a bad rap, often deservedly so, for its relationship with the Jewish community and its stance on issues that matter to the Jewish community. But the NDP is also an extremely diverse party. It's a coalition, like every political party is, and it's also very diverse on a regional level. And so in BC, where I come from, and again, in terms of transparency, I spent most of my career in politics, trying to fight the NDP to the death, trying to keep them out of government in BC, and then try to kick them out of government because for a whole bunch of different areas of disagreement. But the current NDP government in BC, flawed, problematic, has a very challenging relationship with the Jewish community on a lot of issues. But the Minister of Public Safety and the Solicitor General, Nina Krieger, is a Jewish woman who, before she was elected for the NDP, was the executive director of the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center. She is as mainstream Jewish community leader as you get, and she's in a very important position at that BC NDP cabinet table. And that would not be the case if all the Jews had walked away from the BC NDP. And so that's sort of my strongest case for why. I'm not going to ask either of you to donate for or volunteer for a party that doesn't reflect your values, but I know, and I'm grateful that you guys understand that there are other people in the community who have a different set of values, and part of our job is to facilitate them taking action so that our voice is heard, so that our contributions are felt in across the political spectrum as widely as we can get.
So, and the follow-up, and I really appreciate all of that, because what it really comes down to is what we've eliminated, and I think that we hear this a lot from, and we're starting to hear it from a lot of right-wing mainstream podcasters out in the States, is that AIPAC is controlling the world and and controlling and influencing policy. And a lot of what we hear down south, people think just naturally is associated with what happens up in the Great White North, and that just simply isn't the truth. So we've eliminated that money is a factor. We realize that we're 1% of the entire population, but we're really centered in some major urban areas. Yet we still have cross-party, more limited than others, a lot of support. Probably, not as much as we would like, but still enough to continue the conversation. Like the conversation isn't over. There is debate on this inter-party and in Parliament as a whole. And I think that one of the nice takeaways from all this is that Jewish values do equate to Canadian values on a fundamental level. I guess, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I'm an optimist. I'm a positive guy most of the time. I do want to maybe touch on a bit of a somber note in response to one thing that you mentioned, Don, and then I'll get back to your question if I can. There is, and you mentioned a couple of specific names, Don, like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. there is a really alarming trend in the US, specifically in the American conservative movement, if you can call it that. Labels get really complicated
Yeah.
these days, but in the conservative movement and the Republican Party, there is a large and unfortunately growing number of primarily young white men. I think, to solve a problem, we need to talk about what it is honestly and directly, who are alienated, are disaffected, who see the political and cultural establishment as biased against them, who feel like the deck is stacked against them in life, and who unfortunately, under the influence of social media and a certain amount of foreign influence and really targeted, effective psychological warfare by sort of the axis of autocracy of, whether it's China, Russia, Iran, Qatar, you have these young men who, a generation ago would have been as pro-Israel, Zionist as it gets, and would have been strong allies of the Jewish community, because that's just what Republicans, what conservatives believed at that point in American political history. Today, unfortunately, their worldview often manifests not just in suspicion of or hostility to Israel. Case in point is the baseless conspiracy theory that Israel had Charlie Kirk assassinated because he was starting to turn on Israel or some nonsense. But beyond that, who see Jews, or sometimes you see code like globalists in this context, as sort of the masterminds of all of the problems that they see in their country. So they sort of paint Jews as the architects of mass immigration and cultural Marxism and all these influences and these terms that get thrown around. They basically, in sort of an echo of what has happened throughout history, they scapegoat the Jewish community and Israel as well for the problems that they see in America today, in a form that I think approximates neo-Nazism. And a part of that is trying to rehabilitate Hitler. And if you listen to Tucker Carlson lately, the idea that the Americans were actually the bad guys in World War II, and that Winston Churchill was a war criminal, and these types of ideas. Those ideas are bleeding into the Canadian conservative movement. In the Conservative Party of Canada, you have people like Pierre Poilievre, Melissa Lantsman, Shuv Majumdar, many others who are unbelievably strong champions and allies for the Jewish community. And there are many others that we'd be here all night if I tried to name all those friends in the Conservative Caucus and the conservative movement in Canada. But all you have to do is look. Pierre Poilievre went to a synagogue in Toronto a few days ago, and said, all of the things that we would like to hear about the importance of securing the future of the Jewish community in Canada. And I used to be a firm believer in not reading the comments. You look at the comments on that Instagram post, and you see hundreds upon hundreds of primarily young white men who say, "I support everything you say except for this. I believed in you, Pierre, but you sold out to the Jews. Now you're just another goy." And this is hundreds and hundreds of people. There is a significant number of people who vote conservative or are more likely to vote conservative if they vote. Again, primarily, though not exclusively, young white men who have a very different set of views on the Canada-Israel relationship and on the Jewish community. It's not based in fact, it's not based in reason or evidence, it's based on vibes, and it's based on what they see on social media and the sort of toxic ideological waters that they swim in. This is a really big societal problem that affects the Jewish community first and worst, but the effects go way beyond the Jewish community, and it's something that keeps me up at night in terms of the future of my family in this country. But it just underlines the importance, back to that idea of multipartisanship, not taking the Conservative Party for granted, not saying to ourselves, we don't have to worry about the Conservatives, we can focus on the Liberals and the NDP and the work we need to do there. If the Jewish community is not actively and strategically and in a very disciplined and relentless way involved in showing up to the table in the Conservative Party and the conservative movement across the country, things will get worse before they get better in terms of conservative support for the Jewish community over time. So sorry to take things in a less hopeful direction. I still believe we're going to win. The good guys are going to win in this fight. But I think it's important to make that point. But as you said, Don, and sorry to take so long to get back to your question, you're absolutely right that the vast majority of politicians in this country have a strong set of values in common with the mainstream Jewish community. There are very few true anti-Semites in public office in this country. What there are is an awful lot of elected officials who, again, don't know very much about the issues that keep us up at night, who are not aware of the urgency of some of these issues, and who will react to the loudest voices that they hear from, who will sometimes give in to intimidation. Because when you put yourself in, I try to put myself in the shoes sometimes of, let's say I'm a Liberal MP who represents a riding where there's not a numerically meaningful, measurable Jewish community. There's a handful of Jewish people in my riding. There's no synagogue. There's no Chabad house. There's certainly no JCC. What is the information that I'm getting about, say, the conflict between Israel and Hamas? If my constituency office is getting sprayed with red paint representing blood because I'm supposedly supporting the genocidal baby killers, right? If my house is being protested by people in keffiyehs, yeah, that's going to piss me off. Yes, I'm going to be resentful of the activists and the radicals that are trying to intimidate me. But when you pair that with thousands of emails that my office is getting from people across the country demanding, whether it's an arms embargo against Israel or other forms of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, the path of least resistance, the approach that takes the least energy and resolve and fortitude, is to go along to get along, right? Maybe to not be outright anti-Israel or take sides against the Jewish community, but to fail to be a friend, to fail to show the courage to stand up against anti-Semitism and that sort of gray zone where anti-Semitism and anti-Israel activism sort of get blurred and cross-pollinate into each other. The incentives for a lot of politicians are stacked against being a true and genuine friend to the Jewish community. And a part of what all of us have to do is to shift those incentives by getting more Canadians aware of some of these issues of shared concern, by making sure more Canadians understand all the ways that what's good for the Jewish community in this country is also good for all Canadians and for the future of this country. And the fact that the people who are, forgive my language, but in some cases literally gunning for the Jewish community are also trying to take apart our society as a whole, and do things that change this country in ways that are not good for any of us in the short or long term. So I think that's our challenge, but also our opportunity, because those shared values are there. Those shared interests are there. We just need to raise our issues and our perspective up the list of things that people are thinking about, starting with people in elected office and then moving out into the public as a whole.
So, Emile, I'm going to shift this to a slightly more positive perspective for a second, because actually, in with real sincerity, I say that CJPAC kind of buoyed my spirits earlier this year. And the reason is, for as long as I've been involved in advocacy with the community, I'm not sure I ever felt as empowered and as much like I am making a difference as I did door knocking with you guys. So I guess what I'd like to do is, take us through a little bit of what happens in a campaign, what maybe happened in our municipal elections and how the community mobilized. And then if you could, I mean, we're not in campaign season right now. We just had federal election a little while ago. We're not close to a provincial election. We're not close to a municipal election. So short of people having politicians over for Shabbat dinner, which I think a lot of people would be intimidated to do, How can people get involved? How can our community be empowered through CJPAC?
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that experience, Jared. And both of you guys, on a personal note, just made a huge contribution to our efforts in that Calgary municipal election. Dawn, you hosted an incredibly valuable Shabbat dinner with a city council candidate, and also did some really important work to sort of shape the debate in some of the key races in the city. And Jared, you were just an incredible leader in coming out to help campaign for candidates that line up with your values and inspire others to do the same. So thank you both for that. You know, what I do as a staff person only works when there are leaders like yourselves who step up and set an example and bring others with them. To answer your question though, Jared, so I mentioned that that money plays a much smaller role in Canadian politics than it does in American politics, and so what that means is that a huge part of a politician's ability to run a winning campaign is based around volunteers. Are you able to find somebody, because you can't pay very many people, if any, certainly on a city council campaign, the vast majority of candidates are not going to be able to have any full-time staff. So can you find somebody who has the time and the skill to volunteer as your campaign manager, as your sign chair, who gets all those annoying lawn signs out to where they're supposed to be, who's responsible for identifying your vote and then getting out the vote when on election day. Campaigns are run in this country by volunteers, and as anybody who's involved in charitable work or philanthropic work, or there used to be, even when I was a kid, the Elks Lodge and the Legion and the Moose Lodge and whatever else, the Rotary Club, and some of those things are still around. But volunteerism in our society is in decline. And I think there are a lot of reasons why that is. I don't think people care any less. I don't think people are any less good and giving than they used to be. But for a bunch of reasons, fewer people than ever show up to volunteer for anything. Politics is sort of, I'm not asking anybody to cry for the politicians because it's not a popular position, but politics is probably harder hit than any other volunteer-based endeavor because so many people just sort of go, politics, it's not for me. I don't want to be involved in the mudslinging and whatever else. Politics doesn't have a great reputation. Some of it deserved, some of it less so. And so the result of those trends is that a typical candidate, whether it's for city council or member of parliament, really relies on a handful. I'm talking fewer than 20, sometimes fewer than 10 people to do the work that needs to be done on a campaign. And the sort of most labor intensive, and I would argue the most important part of a campaign, is the process of sending volunteers out to canvass, knocking on doors or ringing doorbells, talking to voters, asking what's on their minds, finding out how they plan to vote, if they plan to support your candidate or somebody else, tracking that data so that you build a list of people whose support you can count on, that you can then follow up and make sure that they show up to cast their ballot when it's time to do that. And so one of the big things that we do at CJPAC is ask people to volunteer a few hours of their time in elections for a candidate who shares their values and needs their help, give them the training and the confidence and the community to do that really effectively. And so, that could look like, Jared, I know, along with a few others of our friends, and Dawn as well, on a Sunday, spending a few hours in a specific neighborhood with some literature that shares a bit about the candidate, sometimes going out canvassing with the candidate themselves, spreading their message to voters, and making sure that the word is getting out, that an election is even happening, because a lot of people, as you both have experienced, go, "Oh, I'm glad you came to my door. I forgot about the election."
Right.
So it's such an important part of the democratic process that really makes campaigns tick and makes the difference between success and defeat. At the other end of the spectrum, we love to be able to, when a candidate comes to us and says, "Hey, I need a team. I know you guys train people. Can you connect me with a campaign manager? Can you get me a volunteer coordinator?" When we're able to sort of do that talent matchmaking between people who have been through CJPAC training and candidates who need that help, that's an incredible contribution to that candidate's campaign to be able to provide that talent. And it's a big part of what we spend our time doing, is giving people the skills that when they show up to a campaign office and say, "Hey, I'm from the Jewish community," or "Hey, I'm an ally of the Jewish community. I'm here to help. And ideally just say, CJPAC suggested that I show up and help, to have them immediately have the skills to make a difference on that campaign. So the campaign manager or the candidate doesn't have to train them because they already have that training through CJPAC or through past campaign experience. It doesn't sound very glamorous, and often it's not. I often have people who haven't gone out door knocking say to me, this really doesn't sound like a very effective way to campaign. Like, you want me to talk to dozens of people at their doors and interrupt their dinner time and wake up their babies by ringing the doorbell. But there is a reason that canvassing, talking to voters on a volunteer level has stood the test of time as sort of the core activity of election campaigns. And the vast majority of people that go out and actually do it and experience it, like you just shared, Jared, come away actually feeling better about democracy, feeling better about the people that live in their community, often their neighbors, because you get to see that most people have a lot in common with yourself. They care about a lot of the same things, whether it's taxes or public safety or transit. And you just get an exposure. In so many of our lives, we sort of live our lives in a bubble of our family and our work and maybe a couple of volunteer commitments. It's a real opportunity to break out of that bubble and find out how other people you wouldn't run into otherwise are thinking and experiencing life in your community or life in Canada today. I see we have a special guest that excited to meet. But you talked about what we do outside of election cycles, Jared. And I should say, for me, it's always election time. Now now that we're through Calgary and Montreal, we're now into Toronto and
Sure.
BC and Winnipeg. But for folks here in the Calgary community, you mentioned, Jared, that there's the opportunity to host politicians for Shabbat dinner and things like that. That's great for some people. It's maybe not the right first step for everyone. But I would say this: it's never too early to start getting trained for future elections. And elections sometimes come sooner than we think, right? So there's going to be a provincial election in Alberta in the next couple of years, unless Premier Smith decides to call one early, right? The next federal election, when I was a kid, we were taught the federal election happens 4 years after the last federal election. Mark Carney could decide to trigger an election any day. We could be into a federal election this coming spring or this coming fall. There could be, a city councilor could resign. There could be a by-election. There could be a leadership race in one party or another, depending on how different elections go. Here at the end of January in Calgary, the city will be hosting the Conservative Party of Canada National Convention, which is a great opportunity for people that are conservative-minded to get engaged in that party, to meet like-minded people from across Canada. So long story short, there is always something you can be doing politically. If there's not an election underway, you can be participating in training to be ready for that election when it comes your way. So always happy. We consider ourselves at CJPAC to be the community's political concierge, we like to say. So always happy to have a conversation with any member of the community about how they can put their time and their talent and their energy to work in a productive way.
Yeah, I remember just in the last federal election, my brother and I just happened to be invited to a bar mitzvah in Toronto, and we went we contacted you, and you connected us with a couple of offices there, and we went door knocking for them in Toronto, and so that's a level of engagement that I feel that I do now because of getting to know you, right? Knowing that option is available. Like you said. That's not everybody's cup of tea, right? Some people just aren't engaged in that sort of way. And so what I find now is if I have a question of a politician about a concern, I can text them because I have committed enough hours. I got to know them. I've been to enough events. What the Schmooze is going to be doing over the next little while is actually inviting some of those politicians in. So what questions should we ask of politicians that come on this show that will speak for not for me and not for Jared and not for you, but will speak for the people who just aren't as aware of the political dynamics? And, we are only really aware, and before I got to know you, Emile, and before October 7th, my level of engagement was much lower, I'll say. And so I would only be upset if a vote went against something that I wanted.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the only time I ever paid attention. But now we really need to pay attention. So what question should Jared and I be asking?
Yeah, I love that. And thanks for sharing that, Don. And truly one of the best parts of my job, one of the absolute highlights, is meeting people who are incredibly accomplished, who have built businesses, who have amazing careers, or who are just starting out, but have a ton of energy and potential, like a certain member of your family, Don. And seeing them go from observers of the political process to
Right.
participants, and really impactful participants in the political process, because that really is what we're trying to accomplish at the end of the day. And so it's just so cool to hear that from you, and to get to be a part of that story. When it comes to politicians, I mean, I'm really excited to listen to your episode with Shuv, because he's a close friend, somebody that I've had the privilege of campaigning for. And Shuv has forgotten more about geopolitics and global affairs and history than I probably will ever know. He's just a wealth and a depth of knowledge. But I'll maybe focus my thoughts on politicians who are less engaged in the Jewish community, less engaged in the issues that we all spend time thinking about. I think that in advocacy, in relationship building, in trying to make politicians aware of the concerns and the issues that the community and the country are facing right now. I think it's and not that you guys would do this, so I say this more for your audience. Very rarely is being confrontational or argumentative the right approach.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you can't ask probing questions or shouldn't ask probing questions and expect clear answers. But it's also really important, I think, to remember something I said earlier, which is that most Canadians, and that extends to most politicians, just aren't thinking about the issues that are keeping all of us up at night. And so I think one of the great services you can do in conversations with some of those politicians, whether it's on the Schmooze or for certain listeners and conversations that they have with politicians in the community, just asking if they're aware of certain facts. So the fact that Jewish Canadians are 25 times more likely to be the target of a hate crime in this country today. Most politicians probably don't know that. So sharing that with them, and then asking, did you know that? Or have you ever spoken to a Jewish person who has experienced anti-Semitism? Asking them what their thoughts are on the Canadian immigration system and what needs to be done to fix that. We have an immigration system that used to be the envy of the world, that brought talented, capable people here of all cultures and faiths and races from around the world to make this a stronger country. I think there's an emerging consensus that system is broken, that there are some really good people that could contribute to Canada who aren't getting in, and some really bad people that don't share our values and actually want to cause us harm that are getting in. So asking politicians for their perspective on what needs to be done to fix big issues like that affect the Jewish community, as I said, sometimes first and worst compared to other Canadians, but have an incredible impact on the trajectory of the country as a whole. So I think broadening the conversation to issues that aren't specific to the Jewish community that affect all Canadians, and using questions as an opportunity to get those politicians to say to themselves, that's a really interesting question I haven't heard before, or I haven't thought about very much. I should really do some reading on that, or I should really talk to some experts in that area. I think that's an incredible way to open the door to an awareness of issues that aren't currently on their radar, and get them thinking about, what is it like to be in the shoes of the Jewish community in Canada today, and just have a human to human conversation. Because I really think when that happens, it's very rare to walk away without more understanding of the other person's perspective, and a greater appreciation for just the diversity of experiences and perspectives that we have in this country.
Amazing.
Emile, as we said at the outset, CJPAC obviously has a national footprint, but Don and I want to reiterate how amazing it is for our community here in Calgary to have you here, and we appreciate you from the job you do, but also as a friend. And so thank you so much for joining us today and spending time with us. If folks want to find out more about CJPAC, where can they go?
Yeah, thanks, guys. First of all, the feeling is mutual. I have so much gratitude and respect and affection for both of you. Just so grateful that you both are a part of my life, both on the professional and the personal level. So thank you for that. And it's a privilege to work with you both. Best place to go is our website, cjpac.ca. And if you guys are willing, when you post the show notes or social, feel free to include my email address, which you both have. But for those listening, it's just escheffel at cjpac.ca. Always happy to have a conversation with any member of the community or ally of the community who wants to talk about how they can make a difference and how CJPAC can help.
Amazing. Emile, this is the exact reason why we wanted to start the Schmooze. It's to get information out there. As much as I knew, I always learn a little bit more. So I just want to thank you for being with us today on the Schmooze. It's been a hell of a time. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate you.